when we discovered that the clerks were tampering with documents, that was kind of a turning point in the whole case. And that basically, that we made that discovery September 1st at that hearing. And what happened was basically, on September 1st, we were in court, and the judge was kind of scolding us about not filing a document properly. And she was really laying into us pretty hard, and we just kind of quietly took it because we were confused. We were like, what are you talking about? And we were confused because we were actually holding the document. And we produced the document. We said, Your Honor, here's the document that you're talking about. And the judge said, I don't know anything about this. And she said, how do you have this document and I don't? And we told her, well, hey, we filed this a month before, blah, 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 blah. What we found out later, or after the fact, was that all the documents that we had filed had basically been thrown into a box and not filed properly. It was almost like someone was purposely trying to prevent our documents from being filed. And the only way that could happen is if the clerks were doing it. So the judge calls for a 15-minute recess, and she basically decides to go and look for this document. She calls for a 15-minute recess, but she's gone for almost an hour. And when she comes back to the courtroom, she is not happy. She is, I think she was very angry, and I think she, in retrospect, she was a bit embarrassed that here these guys were who weren't even lawyers, but we had our stuff together, and she's the judge and didn't know anything about this stuff. And we had, at that point, been making claims that the clerks were tampering with documents, but this was something that was considered unthinkable. The clerks would never do this, and we were crazy if we think the clerks were doing this, but the evidence was right there. So during the course of the hearing, the next thing that came up, the next point that we had to cover, was the fact that Anthony Smith, the attorney for the Watchtower, was refusing to cooperate with the subpoenas that we had filed. There was certain evidence that we wanted, and the Watchtower was just, no, we're not going to cooperate. And, you know, it's funny because one of their teachings is that you should always be in subjection to the superior authorities, which basically means if the police or the government wants something from you, then you comply, you cooperate, you give it to them, because that's what a Christian does. A good Christian, you know, follows all the rules and follows the laws and whatnot. But that doesn't seem to apply to the Watchtower itself, because when they received the subpoenas, they just refused to cooperate. And we told the judge about this, and she basically jumped on Mr. Smith, and she said, you know, why aren't you cooperating, and this and that. And Mr. Smith's attitude pretty much was, well, they're not lawyers, so I shouldn't have to, you know, give them what they asked for. He had a real nasty attitude, and he was very arrogant. And, you know, that kind of was the whole pervasive attitude through the whole case, that because you're not a lawyer, you should be denied justice. And that's pretty much how they treated us and how they acted. If you don't have a lawyer, you don't have a right to even come to court. You know, the law doesn't take into account the fact that you just might be poor. You might not be able to afford a lawyer. And let's face it, lawyer fees are high. The average person walking down the street can't afford a lawyer. So what do? You know, and this is why we took the case into court ourselves. We had no choice. So the judge basically told Mr. Smith to cooperate, and you know, and we told the judge we don't think he's going to cooperate anyway, no matter what you say. And the judge said, well, then we'll have to explore a court order. And then we moved on to the next point of discussion and whatnot. So several weeks later, I actually put together a court order, a motion to compel, to force the Watchtower to provide the documents that we needed to make our case. And the motion to compel came back denied. And I was scratching my head. I was thinking, what? You know, because in the September 1st hearing, the judge herself said, you know, we may have to create a motion to compel. But her exact words were, well, we'll worry about that bridge when we cross it, but that may have to be an option. So this was her idea, creating a motion to compel. So I put the motion together, and filed it. And I figured it's a no-brainer. It'll come back, granted, and the Watchtower will be forced to provide us the information that we wanted. So imagine my surprise when I got the motion back and it was denied. And I'm thinking, why would the judge deny a motion that she herself suggested? It just didn't make any sense. And after we did a little bit of digging and fact-finding, we discovered that the judge knew nothing about these motions. That basically the clerks had forged the judge's decision to deny the motion. The judge didn't know anything about it, and it's incredible. It was like, what, did the Watchtower buy off the clerks too? I mean, we just couldn't believe it. Okay. The next thing that came up was several weeks later we were scheduled for a hearing where the judge was going to determine if the case would continue and go forward. And I think the first date was December 26th, which I thought was strange because the courthouse was closed Christmas week. The courthouse wasn't even physically open. So I thought to myself, why would the judge schedule a hearing when the courthouse is closed? That was the first thing. That just, didn't feel right. So then Brenda Tolbert, the clerk, judge's personal clerk, called and said, your hearing's been rescheduled to, she called 2 or 3 times to reschedule, but I think she said it was January 3rd, I think. And she said, the judge is going to hear your arguments, your oral arguments then, and that's your date. And we said, okay, no problem. And it was about 2 weeks, maybe a week prior to the date, and we get a phone call from Brenda Tolbert, and she says, okay, the judge has canceled that court date, and your new date's going to be January 5th. And we were like, okay, fine, January 5th, no problem. And then we got a call a couple days before, I think it was actually the day before, and Brenda Tolbert says, the judge has changed her mind, and there's not going to be a hearing, and she's going to decide the case and send you a written notification of what her decision is. And that was kind of peculiar because Judge James was always the kind of judge who wanted to hear arguments. She wanted to hear, what you were going to say, what this person was going to say. She made a very informed decision. She didn't just jump up and decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. She always made an informed decision based upon arguments, evidence, emotions and whatnot. So that in itself seemed peculiar. So I made a few phone calls and started doing a little digging. And what I discovered was, and this was just a complete shock, the judge never set these dates for the hearing, any of these hearings. Every single time Brenda Tolbert called to tell us, oh, your hearing has been set up for this date or that date, it was all false. Because basically Judge James was out of town for Christmas vacation. She left town before Christmas and didn't arrive back in town until I think it was January 5th, the day that Brenda Tolbert called to tell us that there wasn't going to be a hearing. The judge was out of town. So there's absolutely no way that the judge could have set these court dates or made these decisions. And once we realized that and we confronted the court with it, all of a sudden the case was dismissed and we were being told that's it, it's over. And we were like, hey, there's something wrong here, because the judge just didn't know anything about it. And it became very obvious from that point, all they were interested in doing was keeping any case that we brought to court out of court, because we had the evidence to prove that the judge couldn't have dismissed this case or couldn't have scheduled these court dates or couldn't have denied any of the motions that were filed, because she wasn't even in town during that period of time. And from that point, it had just been a matter of the court was trying to find a way to cover this up. to prevent the public from knowing that clerks tamper with cases all the time, especially if they're cases with people who actually don't have a lawyer.